The 1800s opened with a miracle and a tragedy. Thomas Jefferson had just become president in the first peaceful transfer of power between rival political parties our young nation had ever seen. But this peace was just a thin veneer. Beneath the surface, the country was humming with tension, a palpable energy that could either propel it to greatness or tear it apart. To the west, a vast, unknown wilderness stretched out, controlled by the French and the Spanish. This land held the key to America's future. It could either make the United States a global power, or it could be the noose that strangled the nation in its crib. Back east, the political rivalries were just as dangerous as any uncharted territory. The long-simmering feud between two titans, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, had moved beyond mere political debate. It had curdled into a personal, venomous blood feud. By the time this decade was over, the map of the world would be redrawn in a way no one could have imagined. One of America's most brilliant founding fathers would be lying dead in the dirt, and the sitting Vice President of the United States would be a fugitive on trial for treason. This is the story of how it all happened. Welcome to Part 7, The Duel and the Great Expansion. Our story really kicks into high gear in 1803, with a man who was having a very bad year, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was fighting a massive, continent-spanning war in Europe, and his finances were in ruins. To make matters worse, he had just lost the jewel of his American empire, the colony of Saint Domingue, what we now call Haiti, to a successful slave revolt. Suddenly, that vast, untamed wilderness in North America, known as Louisiana, didn't seem so important anymore. Napoleon didn't care about forests and rivers on the other side of the world. He needed cash, and he needed it now. At this exact moment, Thomas Jefferson had a much smaller goal in mind. He just wanted to buy the city of New Orleans. He understood that whoever controlled the mouth of the Mississippi River controlled the economic lifeblood of the entire American interior. So he sent his diplomats, Robert Livingston and James Monroe, to France with a clear mission and a budget of $10 million. Their instructions were simple: secure the port of New Orleans at all costs. But when they arrived in Paris, Napoleon's ministers didn't just listen to their offer. They looked at the American envoys and asked a question that would echo through history: what would you give for the whole thing? They had been sent to buy a city, and now they were being offered an empire. After some frantic negotiation, a deal was struck for $15 million, a little over 3 cents an acre. The United States doubled in size overnight. The Louisiana Purchase was, without a doubt, the greatest land deal in history. It added 828,000 square miles to the young nation, stretching from the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains. But for Jefferson, this monumental success was also a profound personal and legal nightmare. Here was a man who had built his entire political career on the principle of strict construction, the idea that the federal government should only do what the Constitution explicitly says it can do. He had railed against Hamilton for years, accusing him of overstepping the bounds of federal power. And now Jefferson scoured the text of the Constitution, desperately looking for a single word, a single clause that gave him the authority to buy foreign land. He couldn't find one. The power simply wasn't there. He was faced with an impossible choice. He could stick to his deeply held principles and risk losing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, possibly allowing France or another European power to build a massive empire right on America's doorstep. Or he could betray his own constitutional philosophy to seize the future. Jefferson chose the land. He chose growth over the strict letter of the law, and in that moment he set a precedent that would shape American expansion for the next century. He gambled, and he won big, but the consequences of that choice, especially regarding the expansion of slavery into this new territory, would haunt the nation for decades to come. While the country was physically doubling in size, the men who had built it were engaged in a process of mutual destruction. At the center of this storm was Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States. Burr was a brilliant and ambitious man, but by 1804 he was politically isolated, a man without a party, and the architect of his ruin was his longtime rival, Alexander Hamilton. For years, Hamilton had systematically worked to destroy Burr's reputation. He saw Burr not just as a political opponent, but as a dangerous man, an unprincipled character who could not be trusted with the reins of government. He blocked Burr's political ambitions at every turn, most recently costing him the governorship of New York. The insults and attacks, published in newspapers and whispered in private parlors, finally reached a breaking point. Burr, his honor and career in tatters, demanded an explanation. Hamilton refused to back down. The matter could only be settled in one way. On the morning of July 11, 1804, the two men met on a narrow ledge in Weehawken, New Jersey, the same spot where Hamilton's own son had been killed in a duel 3 years earlier. What happened next is a moment frozen in American history. According to witnesses, Hamilton, perhaps having a last-minute change of heart, fired his shot into the air, intentionally missing his opponent. But Aaron Burr did not. He took careful aim, fired, and the bullet struck Hamilton in the lower abdomen, ricocheting through his liver and spine. Alexander Hamilton, the genius who had designed the American financial system and saved the nation's credit, collapsed. He died in agony the next day. The nation was in shock. The sitting vice president was now a fugitive, wanted for murder in both New York and New Jersey. It remains the darkest, most visceral moment of political polarization in our nation's history, a chilling reminder of what happens when political disagreements become personal and irreconcilable. With the Louisiana Territory now officially part of the United States and Alexander Hamilton buried, Jefferson turned his attention to the great unknown. He needed to know what exactly he had bought. For this monumental task, he chose his personal secretary, a young Army captain named Meriwether Lewis, who in turn chose his friend and former commanding officer, William Clark, to be his co-captain. The expedition they led was not a simple journey of exploration. They were a military reconnaissance team, the Corps of Discovery, on a mission of national importance. Their orders were threefold. First, find a practical water route to the Pacific Ocean, the fabled Northwest Passage. Second, establish relationships with the native American tribes they encountered, informing them of their new great father in Washington. And third, they were to be scientists, cataloging every new plant, animal, and geological feature they found in this uncharted land. In the spring of 1804, they set off from St. Louis and disappeared into the wild. For over 2 years, the nation heard almost nothing from them. They were presumed lost. During that time, they endured hardships we can barely imagine today. They pauled and pulled their boats thousands of miles against the powerful current of the Missouri River. They survived terrifying encounters with grizzly bears, a creature previously unknown to American science. They faced starvation, disease, and the brutal, unforgiving winters of the Rocky Mountains. They navigated complex and sometimes tense encounters with dozens of native tribes, relying heavily on the guidance and translation skills of a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea. When they finally re-emerged from the wilderness in September of 1806, they were greeted as heroes who had returned from the dead. They had failed to find an easy water route to the Pacific, but what they brought back was far more valuable. They brought back maps, scientific specimens, and detailed journals. They brought back the blueprint for the American empire. They had proved that the West was not just a myth or a dream. It was a tangible reality, a vast continent that was now open, ready to be settled, ready to be taken. Their journey transformed the mental map of America and ignited the westward expansion that would define the rest of the 19th century. So what does this all mean for us today? The tactical reality of the 1800s is that growth, especially rapid growth, always comes with a price. Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase was a strategic masterpiece. But by doubling the nation's size, he also doubled the territory where the brutal and divisive battle over slavery would eventually be fought, leading directly to the Civil War. The duel between Hamilton and Burr serves as a stark and bloody lesson. It proves that when political rhetoric goes unchecked, when demonization replaces debate, it doesn't just stay as words. It can and does lead to literal violence. History shows us a recurring pattern. A nation that grows too fast, that expands its power and influence without a solid moral and educational foundation to support it, will eventually fracture under its own weight. And we are seeing those fractures today. We see it in our schools, which have often stopped teaching the complex, messy truths about these men. Instead of learning from their triumphs and their fatal mistakes, we've turned them into simple caricatures, heroes, or villains. We miss the vital lessons embedded in their stories. We also see it in our veteran support system, which is buckling under the weight of decades of conflict, struggling to care for the men and women who have served this nation. Yet so much of our public discourse remains focused on the political duels of our current leaders, the soundbites and the outrage, instead of focusing on the real-world needs of the people on the ground. If you want to move beyond the headlines and get the unfiltered truth, if you want to explore the tactical lessons we can learn from the blood and the dirt of our past, then I invite you to join our community. It's called Veteran Perspectives, and you can find it on Substack. This is our briefing room, where we have honest conversations about how to apply the lessons of history to today's problems, like how to repair the foundations of our schools and fix our veteran support systems. Join the platoon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you for watching.